everyone, and welcome to this Australia Reads event being hosted by Booklinks Queensland. We have 10 wonderful authors here for you, well 9 at the moment, to read. But first I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we meet today and recognise that this land has always been under their custodianship. I am on the land of the Jagera, Yuggera and Yuggurabal people, and I invite you to write in the chat room the country you are on. I pay my respect to elders past and present. So today we have an amazing list of authors to read to you. Sally Rippon will begin, and she was a Reading Hour ambassador last year, so that's why I thought it would be good to start with her. And then we have local authors Dave Lowe, Sam Wheeler and Brian Falkner. Then we'll be followed by Booklinks patron Jackie French, although Jackie is AWOL at the moment, so we just hope she turns up. More local authors, James Moloney, Gerard Bauer, Christine Bongers and Allison Rushby. And finally, a current ambassador for Australia Reads, Will Kostakis. Will also be taking part in a session on Tuesday morning at 9:30 Queensland time, along with Jacqueline Harvey, another ambassador. And many of the authors that are here today, some of them will be taking part in quiz teams tomorrow afternoon at 4:30. We ran one yesterday and it was loads of fun, and Brian Falkner will be emceeing that session. So go in and book if you haven't already done so. So I'm now going to invite Sally to start reading.
Hello, thanks for the introduction, Jenny, and welcome everybody. I'm coming from the Wurundjeri, the area of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne, Brunswick, and we're happy that we've just come out of lockdown, so I'm celebrating. And I wanted to read to you from Polly and Buster, and I think you'll understand where we're at. So it's not quite at the beginning, but you'll get the gist pretty quickly. Every day when Polly gets home, she dumps her school bag in the kitchen, kicks off her shoes and runs straight out into the garden. She climbs to the top of the tree at the end of her yard. Then she calls out, "Aroo, aroo." This is their secret call. Today, when Buster swings up into the tree, Polly sees he is wearing his favourite red jumpsuit. It's a bit squeezy now that Buster has become so big and hairy, but it has lots of pockets. Buster fills his pockets with treasures for Polly to admire. Buster tips out his pockets onto the branch. Today, he has stones and sticks and 3 glass marbles. Then he digs his fingers even deeper and pulls out 5 sticky jam cakes covered in pocket fluff. "Ta-da!" he says, grinning widely, his moss green fur glowing pink with pride. "Afternoon tea." Polly smiles. "Thanks, Buster," she says, as cheerily as she can manage. She loves Buster's jam cakes, even if they're covered in pocket fluff, but she doesn't feel hungry today. Polly sits and watches her dearest friend shove one jam cake after another into his big, wet mouth. Eventually, Buster notices that Polly isn't eating. "What's the matter?" he asks, spraying crumbs all over her. "Oops, sorry," he says. He tries to wipe the crumbs off her face with his big paws, but ends up smearing her cheeks with jam. "I mean," he says, swallowing a lump of jam cake, "what's the matter, Polly? You okay? You haven't touched your afternoon tea." Polly stares off into the distance. "I'm messed up in spells today," she says sadly. "Again." Buster stops chewing. "Oh," he says, looking concerned. "What happened?" He presses his finger down onto a blob of jam on his fur and sneaks it into his mouth. Polly sighs. "I exploded a toad." "Oh," Buster says again. He pauses, not quite sure what to say next. Were you supposed to explode the toad?" "No," Polly says. "Of course not. I was supposed to get rid of its warts, but I accidentally exploded it instead." Buster watches Polly carefully. She can see that he's wondering whether it's okay to laugh. Polly tries to keep her mouth still, but a smile twitches at the corner of her lips. Buster lets out a hoot. You exploded a toad, he splutters. That's hilarious. Polly frowns. It's not funny, Buster, she says. Mallory Halloway laughed at me, and then I got mad and threw wart potion at her face, and Boris and Walter got some on their legs too. And now my mother will have to pay for new school pants for them. And Miss Spinnaker made me stay behind and clean up the classroom. It was the worst day ever. Oh, says Buster. His face falls. That's bad. That's really bad. He immediately shrinks in size. When Buster feels happy, he gets bigger and brighter. When he is sad, he becomes small and grey. When Buster feels Polly's feelings, he becomes almost the same size as her. Polly thinks this is the sign of a true friend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. That was wonderful. Okay, our next reader is Dave Lowe, and I think he's reading from My Hamster is a Genius.
Yep, sure am. There we go. So this is from my first book, which is called My Hamster's a Genius. Chapter 1. Never sticky tape your little sister to her bed, even if she asks you to. I did, and my mom went absolutely bananas. My mom has a long history of unusual punishments. Once, when she caught me giving my sister's Barbie doll a haircut, she sat me down and cut my hair in the same style. And now, thanks to the sticky taping incident, my mom has locked my TV and all my games in the shed and announced she was buying me a pet. You're 9 years old now, Ben, she said firmly. That's old enough to be responsible. If you can show me you can actually take care of something, then you'll get your things back. I was speechless, but everyone else had an opinion on what pet to get. My dad wanted a greyhound so he could win money on it at the track. Lucy, my recently sticky taped little sister, wanted a pony. My mom wanted something that was really small and really quiet. Me, I went straight to my room, made a list and presented it to my mom. Ben's possible pets. 1, aardvark. 2, monkey or chimp of some kind, in brackets, not a baboon. 3, bumblebee. 4, husky dog and a pair of rollerblades so I don't have to walk to school anymore. 5, medium-sized octopus and medium-sized swimming pool. 6, hairy-nosed wombat. Mom folded the list and slipped it into her jeans pocket. Then she went to the pet shop and came back with a hamster. And so later that day, Ben's in his room with the hamster and nothing else to do, so he has to do his maths homework. I was already stumped. I scratched my head, I rubbed my chin. Finally, I read the question out loud like I'd seen my dad do with his crossword clues, although it didn't seem to help him much. 85 minus 28, I said. 57, came a small, rough voice. I glanced around. No one. I must have imagined it. I said the sum once more, and again I heard a voice. That would be 57. It sounded like the whisper of someone with a bad cough. I looked around, completely baffled. Was someone playing a joke on me? My sister wouldn't have known the answer, but it could have been my dad. I got up, opened the bedroom door and looked around. There was no sign of anyone. So I closed my door, sat at the desk, and wondered if I was going crazy. 85 minus 28, I said for the third time. As I told you, came the same voice, more impatiently this time, the answer is 57. I leaped out of my seat and looked under my bed and in my wardrobe before sitting back at my desk in disbelief. It was then that I saw the hamster peering at me through the bars of his cage. It's rude to stare, he said. I gasped. Not you, I said, astonished. He looked behind him as if there might be another talking hamster in the cage. I guess so, he said. You know how to do basic maths? I was going to say talk, I said.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Dave. And maybe some kids will rush out to find what happens next. Our next author is Samantha Wheeler. Unmute, Sam.
Hello everybody, I live in the land of the Quandamooka people, and today I'm reading a story, part of Mr. Cassowary, that is set far from where I live up in North Queensland. And the little bit that I'm going to read you is when Flynn and Abby go to the Cassowary Rehab Centre to clean up before the cyclone. And Dad is petrified of cassowary, so refuses to come into the centre, so he cooks the barbecue across the road. And this is what happens. It wasn't long before the smell of sizzling sausages filled the air. My mouth watered. Want to check it out? Abby asked. I'm starving. I looked across the road. Dad had stacked fresh white bread in piles on the small fold-out table and set out bottles of barbecue and tomato sauce. My stomach rumbled. Race you, shouted Abby. I took off after her, still holding my rake. We were halfway to the barbecue when someone yelled, watch out! Abby and I skidded to a stop. One of the volunteers was making broad sweeping motions with her arms. Hey, shoo, get out, go on, shoo, she yelled. At first, I thought she was shouting at me, but then Abby tugged my arm. Not you, silly, behind you. I froze. An adult cassowary was striding towards us. It had lost most of its feathers, and it was huge and looked hungry. Don't run, and don't look it in the eye, hissed Abby. Just stand really, really still, otherwise. I stood like a statue, my pulse drumming in my ears. But the cassowary kept coming, placing one enormous clawed foot deliberately in front of the other. I tried to take deep breaths, but it was now only 4 steps away from me and Abby. 3, 2, 1. The cassowary stood directly in front of me. It was so close I could smell its feathers. I held my breath and gripped the rake tightly to my chest. Despite Abby's advice, I glanced up at its face, but it wasn't looking at me. It was staring over my shoulder at something else. Someone else. 1, 2, 3. I let a shaky breath out through my nose as the cassowary walked steadily past me. Now it was headed towards the barbecue, its strange yellow and black eyes focused on Dad's back. Dad! I shouted, Dad, be careful! But Dad couldn't hear me above the chainsaw roaring across the road. He continued to turn the sausages with tongs like nothing was wrong. I had to get closer. Stand still, hissed Abby, as the cassowary darted its head left and right and shook its feathers. It was now only meters away from Dad, and it puffed out its chest. Dad, I screamed, behind you! Dad finally turned around, and when he registered the huge cassowary before him, his eyes grew wide and his jaw dropped. What on earth? He stepped backwards, bumping against the barbecue. He gripped the tongs tightly. They were his only weapon against the cassowary's murderous claws.
Oh, that's it.
What's going to happen next?
Right. And can also say, Sam, we've got some Year 10 students on here as well. Do you have your Everything I've Never Said book there that you can just wave the cover at?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So Year 10ers, it might be something that you would be interested in.
Yeah.
About a little girl who can't talk but can communicate in a different way.
Thank you. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.
Okay, Brian Falkner. He's another one who writes across different ages. So let's see what Brian has for us today.
All right, thanks, Jenny. So I'm reading from Maddie West and the Tongue Taker from the first chapter. When Maddie started speaking Japanese, her mum took her to the doctor. The doctor was a gentle, grey-haired man with gold-rimmed glasses that made him look intelligent. Maddie liked the doctor immediately. So, what is the problem today? The doctor asked, smiling kindly at Maddie. She's speaking in foreign tongues, Maddie's mum said, but the word foreign had a strange ring to it, as though it brought a bad taste to her mouth when she said it. The doctor frowned, and for some reason began to examine Maddie's ear. What kind of foreign tongues, he asked. There was no bad taste to the way he said it. Japanese, Maddie's mum said. At least I think it was Japanese. It might have been Korean or Taiwanese or even Chinese. It had been Japanese, but this conversation seemed to be between her mum and the doctor, so Maddie didn't butt in to tell them so. So, you've been speaking a foreign language. The doctor raised an eyebrow at Maddie, then turned back to her mum. I don't quite understand. What do you want me to do? I want you to... Maddie's mum stopped. It was quite clear that she wasn't sure what she wanted the doctor to do. I want you to fix her. The doctor looked from Maddie to her mum, then back again. I don't think she's broken, he said. Maddie could have hugged him on the spot. Well, I want you to do something, Maddie's mum said. All right, the doctor said. I suppose we could run some tests. Tests, yes, good, tests, Maddie's mum said. Would it be all right if I spoke to Maddie alone for a moment first? The doctor asked. Alone? Why? Maddie's mum narrowed her eyes. It made her look like a cat. I think it will help, the doctor said. Oh, Maddie's mum looked sideways at Maddie, but stood up. How long will it take? As long as it takes, the doctor said. Maddie's mum narrowed her eyes even further at the doctor. Maddie was starting to like him more and more. Maddie's mum walked over to the door, opened it, and left. The doctor stood and closed the door softly. What kind of tests? Maddie asked. Oh, there are no tests, the doctor said. I just said that so your mother would wait outside. I hope you don't mind. I thought that, Maddie said with a smile. And no, I don't mind. Now, the doctor sat on the corner of his desk and looked at her over the top of his spectacles. How old are you, Maddie? I'm 9, Maddie said, and a half. And a very important half it is, the doctor said. And you speak Japanese. Do you speak any other languages? No, I don't know, Maddie said. How many other languages are there? Well, there are hundreds of them, the doctor said. Too many for any one person to know. I myself learned French at school, and I have a little smattering of Polish from my grandmother. I once knew a person who could speak 5 languages. Maddie wasn't really listening. She was visualizing a smattering of Polish, which sounded like something that had once happened when she was helping her mum clean the dining table. Would you like to hear some French? The doctor asked. It's a beautiful language. Yes, I honestly would, Maddie replied. He chuckled. That's quite extraordinary, he said. What is it? Maddie asked, convinced she was about to learn some great secret that only doctors knew. You are, the doctor said. Maddie considered that. She wasn't sure if he was being nice or rude. Well, what do you mean? She asked. Well, when I asked you if you would like to hear some French, the doctor said, I asked it in French. Maddie quickly thought back. Yes, the doctor had said, Est-ce que tu aimerais entendre un peu de français? So that was French. In fact, everything I said from then on was also in French. The doctor smiled. Wow, said Maddie. And you answered in French also, he said, and went back to sit in his chair, which puffed and wheezed as he did so. Maddie thought that the doctor should lose some weight, but also that a doctor would know that without having to be told by a 9-year-old girl, so she said nothing. Do you also speak Polish? The doctor asked, and from the sound of the words, Maddie guessed this time he was speaking Polish. She answered using the same kind of words. I guess so, if this is it. Well, I never, the doctor said. So that's Maddie West and the Tongue Taker.
What an intriguing book, Brian.
Thanks.
And I know it's really, really popular in the schools. And Brian, you're another one who writes up. Do you want to very, very quickly tell us what your most recent book is that would suit those year 10s?
All right.
Very quickly.
I have a copy of it. Look, I don't think I've got a copy right in front of me. It's called Katapo Joe Blitzkrieg, and it's a World War II spy thriller with a teenage spy in Germany during the Second World War. So unfortunately, I didn't think to have a copy right beside me to hold up. I'm not as clever as Sam.
Okay, now I would like to invite our patron of Booklinks, Jackie French, to speak. Thank you, Jackie.
Hi, I'm on the land of the Darga and Aruluan people of the Yuan Nation. And this is a story. It's a story of pirates, which is a piece of history that most Australians would rather like to forget, that for 20 years, Sydney was a pirate town. But we also forget that as well as the horrors and the tragedies, there were periods of extraordinary friendship and partnership and joint learning with Indigenous people. And Pirate Boy is about the worst of humanity then, but also the best as well. And it is an adventure story. This part is halfway through the book. Mr. Huntsmore has taken his ship to prey on a Dutch ship heading to Batavia. They have won, but now the crew, who he has treated terribly, mutiny after they have won the treasure. And Mr. Huntsmore, the owner, "This is an outrage. I will see you hanged, man." I doubt it. Captain Danvers smiled wearily at Mr. Huntsmore. "You see, it's like this. You have two choices. You and your son can die by the sword, or we throw you overboard and see if you can swim." "Don't be ridiculous, man. The sea is alive with sharks. This is mutiny." Ben realised he'd never seen the captain look amused before. "Ah, you've noticed, have you, Huntsmore? Always did think you were a bit slow on the uptake." The men laughed. "You'll never get away with this," Ben's father yelled. "Why not? Dead men tell no tales. Those are your very words, Huntsmore. Give us a few weeks and the Golden Girl will have a new name, a new history, and never appear in any port she's been to before. And every man on board will be free of New South Wales forever. So what it will be, shooting or man overboard?" "I demand," blustered Ben's father, then stopped, obviously trying to come up with a demand that might be met. "Or we could take it nice and slow," suggested Danvers. "Would you like that, sir?" He spat out the last word. "Chop off your fingers first, so you can feel what it's like for all those you expected to give their limbs for you today." "Stop it," yelled Ben. "Sorry, little master," said Danvers, with a small flash of sympathy in his eyes. "You're not like your father, but we can't risk having you tell anyone what happened here. It's fish food for you too." "Excuse me, Captain." The crowd turned to look at Higgins, still leaning against the boat. "You promised each of us who fought today a share for our work." "I did." "Well, the lad helped, even if his father is a pox-ridden mongrel. That boy saved us down amongst the icebergs, and he helped with the wounded today. I reckon the whippersnapper deserves a share too. Let his life be his share, that's what I say." Silence. Ben could hear his heart beating. He didn't look at his father. A dutiful son would say, "I will die with my father, an Englishman to the last." But he didn't want to die, nor had he ever really felt that this man was his father. He had just filled the space now and then where a father might be. "Curse be true," said another voice. "The pup will be as bad as his father." "You've earned a chance, lad," Danvers said. He nodded towards a blue smudge on the east. "See that? It's an island bigger than Shark Island, Rottnest, the Dutchies call it. They say it's full of giant rats a man can catch with his bare hands. If you're lucky, another Dutch ship will find you and take you to Batavia." "He won't survive ashore," said one of our Harry. "Not a boy alone on the coast like this." "A slow death, not a fast one," Captain Danvers said. At last, Captain Danvers ordered the mainsail furled. "Volunteers to take the boys ashore?" Silence, bare feet shuffled. Danvers turned to Ben. "I'm sorry, lad. I'm not going to order any man to take you. Don't suppose you can swim?" "No, sir." Someone sniggered. "Might be time you learned then." Why should they risk their lives for Ben? None of them even knew him, except he thought for Higgins. He looked for him and found him still leaning against the boat. "I saved you once," Ben said to him. "I used to be a ferryman back and forth across the Thames," said Higgins. "I know enough to get to the island and back." Higgins clambered down the ladder first. The Pinnace rocked as he settled himself in the seat. "Hoil the sails," Sneezer said Higgins. Ben fumbled with the ropes. Suddenly something moved. A figure clambered up on the gunwale, then dived graceful as a sea eagle. A dark head emerged among the waves, swimming towards them, using a strange sideways stroke, the other hand holding his spears. "Gawara," A few heartbeats and Gawara's hand grabbed the side of the pinnace. He threw his spears into it, then hauled himself, dripping into. "Come to join us, Billy boy?" asked Higgins softly. Gawara didn't reply. He gathered his spears, checked their points, and sat at the other end of the boat. Gawara was not even given a name until halfway through the story. He was called Billy Boy by the sailors. But the other half of the book is how, with two most unexpected heroes, Higgins cast off from England and Gawara cast off by the colony, Ben has a chance not just for survival, but for a heck of a lot more.
Thank you, Jackie. That was wonderful. Thanks so much. We will move on now to James Moloney. Unmute, Jim. Unmute.
There we go. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm going to read from this book, The Young Vikings. The Vikings were a very... they were a culture where you had to show your courage and your skill with weapons from an early age. So I'm going to read from just the first few pages of the book, because I believe when you're writing basically an action adventure book, you need that action and excitement to get going right from the start. My legs ached from running along the forest tracks. My lungs burned. I didn't know how long I could keep it up, but I had to if I wanted to stay ahead of the hunters behind me. There were dogs in the forest too. I caught glimpses of them over my shoulder. How long could I keep my lead? I forced my weary legs on, faster, faster. It was going to be worth it though. First blood on my spear. That was what I was after. That's why I'd surged so far in front of the others. I wanted to be the first to reach the wild boar our dogs had sniffed out. If I could kill the boar on my own, my friends would cry, "Hawk, the great hunter," all the way back to the village. When my father heard the story, his face was filled with pride. I saw the boar clearly through the trees. It puffed rapid breaths of steam into the morning air. So did I. Which one of us would give up first? It wasn't going to be me. The boar veered off the track into the bracken. I charged after it with my spear ready above my head. The undergrowth grabbed at my body as though it wanted to hold me back. I couldn't see my feet or the way ahead. Then my shins smashed into something hard and I tumbled forward, landing face first in the mud of the forest floor. I sat up quickly, ignoring the blood below my knees. Then I forgot all about my aching shins, because close by, something breathed heavily, something big. I peered into the forest gloom and found the boar panting, furious, and staring at me. By the gods, those tusks! Two deadly curves jutted from its jaw, their vicious points glimmering in the single shaft of light that broke through the bracken. I'd seen what a boar's tusks could do to a dog. My father told stories of men who'd been killed. Then before I could move, before I could even think, the boar bounded towards me with its head low and those tusks ready to cut me open. I moved to grab my spear, but it was gone. I must have dropped it when I fell. I looked behind me and saw it lying in the mud. Was I trying to reach it? Quickly, I scrambled backwards on elbows and heels, eyes still on the boar as it ran at me. It was too late to get hold of the spear. Then a flash of fur leapt over me. Instantly, the forest erupted with growls and snarls. It was my dog, White Eye. He drove the boar back, dancing out of the way when the beast slashed at it with its deadly tusks. I got to my feet. My shins stung as angry bees swarmed all over them. It was my only chance. With the spear in my hands once more, I lunged for the boar and missed. I lunged again, but at the last moment, I had to pull back. White Eye was too close. What if I drove the blade into him instead of the boar? I couldn't bear the thought. I sprang onto a log and tried to get behind the pair of fighting animals, but the pain in my legs made me clumsy. I slipped off the log, The boar saw me and shifted away. Worse than that, it spotted a gap in the jumble of fallen logs. With a vicious thrust, the boar forced White Eye aside and then bolted free into the forest. Damn, I cried. My chance of glory was gone. I heard the thud of running feet and caught a glimpse of bodies flashing by among the trees. There's the boar, after it, voices cried out. The rest of the hunters had caught up. I fought my way through the bracken and back to the forest trail with White Eye on my heels. But if I didn't hurry, I'd be the last to arrive at the kill instead of the first. Here we are.
Wonderful, Jim. And a great book. Lots of action in that one. I'm now going to ask Michael Gerard Bauer, another local boy, to come online and read to us.
Thanks. I'm reading from my book, Just a Dog. Just a Dog is a story told by an 11-year-old boy called Corey about his dog called Mr. Mosley. And he tells all the stories of everything that's happened to the dog, the funny stories, the exciting stories, the mysterious things, the sad things. And this part he talks about the fact that Mr. Mosley is a very big dog. He's a cross between a Great Dane and a Dalmatian, and a lot of people are afraid of him because of his size. But Mr. Mosley is a very gentle dog, and he's afraid of a lot of things, including thunder and lightning and leaf blowers and all sorts of things. But Corey says the thing that Mr. Mosley should be most afraid of is Corey's little sister, Amelia. So this is about Mr. Mosley and Amelia. My sister Amelia was always doing terrible stuff to Mr. Mosley. It started when she was little, and she used to climb all over him and hold his ears up into the air and turn him into a wabbit, or pull the skin out from around his mouth and eyes just to make him look stupid. It got worse when she was bigger. That's when she started dressing him up. She made Mr. Mo wear all these wigs and hats and scarves, and she put big plastic earrings on him and decorated him with flowers and tinsel and all sorts of stuff. Mo always let Amelia do whatever she wanted. He just sat there and waited till she got bored or someone came and rescued him. One of the worst things Amelia did was the day she found a packet of glitter in Mum's scrapbook drawer and covered Mr. Mosley with it. Then she brought him in to show everyone how sparkly he looked. Whenever Mo went, he left a trail of glitter behind him. And before we could get him outside, he did one of those giant shakes he does after you give him a wash, and all this glitter sprayed everywhere. Dad said it was better than Sydney Harbour Bridge fireworks on New Year's Eve. Mum wasn't happy about it at all, but Amelia told her it was just fairy dust, and Mr. Mosley was a magic fairy dog, and he was spreading his good luck doggy magic all around the world. But it wasn't good luck for Mum and Dad and me. We had to clean up the mess, and I had to give Mr. Mosley a bath to try to get the glitter off him. That wasn't easy. Even after 2 washes, he still sparkled a bit. So did I. On account of halfway through his first wash, he did another one of his giant shakes and I got totally soaked. But the glitter wasn't the worst thing Amelia ever did to Mr. Mosley. What she did with the marking pens was way worse. What happened was one day when no one was looking, Amelia got some thick marking pens and drew all over Mr. Mosley with them. She drew big round black glasses and bushy red eyebrows and a weird looking moustache and some spiky hair on top of his head. Then she tried to draw a tie and a collar around his neck, but they didn't turn out too good. We only found out what Amelia did when she came in and said she had a big surprise to show us. Then she made us all come downstairs and she brought Mr. Mo out from under the house and she said, "Ta-da!" like she'd done some kind of a magic trick or something. Mum and Dad tried to go cross on her, but when they looked at Mr. Mosley's face, they both started laughing and then they couldn't stop. They laughed so much they had tears coming out of their eyes, and Mum had to run to the bathroom because she said she was going to be sick. Every time she tried to come back, Mr. Mosley just had to look at her and make his drawn-on eyebrows go up in the air, and Mum would run away again holding her stomach. She laughed so much. One time, I think I heard her make a little fart noise, and I didn't think Mum even did that kind of stuff. It was only after I gave Mr. Mosley a bath to clean him up that we found out that the pen Amelia had used for Mo's red eyebrows was a permanent ink one. After his first wash, when the eyebrows didn't come off, Mum said, "Oh, poor old Mo, what has she done to you?" Then Mum got another fit of the giggles. It took a long time and a lot of washes and scrubbing for those eyebrows to come totally off, so Mr. Mosley ran around for ages looking really surprised all the time. I guess it was bad what Amelia did, drawing all that stuff on Mr. Mosley, but she was only little, and I guess it didn't really hurt Mo at all. Besides, it was sort of good too, because of how it made Mum and Dad laugh so much that they cried. Afterwards, Amelia said she was sorry, and Mum made her promise not to do anything like that again. But Dad said, if ever we needed extra money, we could always rent Mr. Mosley out for a whiteboard. Mum gave Dad a punch on the arm for that. Just a pretend one, though.
Thank you, Michael. That was terrific. I know that for the year 10s in the session, they are probably reading Don't Call Me Ishmael or those sorts of books. But what about The Things That Will Not Stand? Is that also a year 10 level?
Could be.
Could be?
Yeah, it could be. It's about the three characters that are in grade 11 students at a university open day. Two boys who meet a girl called Frida at a university open day and spend the day together. And that's the things that they discovered about each other and the secrets they are willing or not willing to reveal during that one day that they meet.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Okay, our next one up is Christine Bongers. She's going to read from Intruder, which has also got a wonderful dog character in it. But I'd also like to say that I think the year 5s and 6s on here, if you haven't read her Henry Hoey Hobson, that's the other book that you'd really, really enjoy. So Christine Bongers, where are you?
Here I am. Thanks, Jenny. I'm going to read from Intruder, as Jenny said. This is written in the first person voice of Kat, who's a 14-year-old girl. And I'm going to start reading, as we all should, from the beginning. Maybe it was the creak of a worn floorboard that woke me, or the subtle shift of air pressure as another body invaded my space. I struggled up out of a dream, confused and disoriented, squinting into the darkness. Dad, is that you? The shadows coalesced into a human form close enough to touch. Is he here? The strange voice, a man's voice, hit my heart like a hammer. I thought he worked nights. I fumbled for the switch on my bedside lamp, alert now, my voice fierce with fright. He's here, I lied desperately. He's here, so you'd better start running. A breathy hint of a laugh, then a sweaty hand brushed mine as it tugged at the sheet, peeling it away from my body. For a heart-stopping moment, I lay there, paralysed and exposed. Merry Christmas, he whispered. Then a hot, heavy hand pressed into the soft flesh of my leg, and that's when I screamed. The blood curdler I let out almost ruptured my own eardrums. I was dimly aware of someone, somewhere, shouting my name, of a light snapping on outside, of more shouting, and the grip on my leg falling away as something hard smashed into my bedroom wall and clattered onto the paving stones outside. I screamed again, or maybe it was still the first scream, the same scream, the never-ending scream that kept on coming as I flailed at the switch on my bedside lamp. By the time I got my light working, the only evidence of the prowler was a single image burned like a lightning strike into my brain. A tanned hand, black hairs dusting the knuckles, a silver ring circling the forefinger, pulling my bedroom door closed behind him. A fist battered at my window. It was the evil witch from next door, outside on the paving stones, shouting my name. I threw myself at the window latch, grateful for the first time in years for the lack of a fence between our 2 yards. It took 3 attempts before the catch gave way. She yanked it open and hefted herself into my room. Kat, are you all right? What happened? She tossed a softball bat onto my bed and reached for me, but I twisted away, stabbing a finger at the door. He went that way. Who did? I don't know. My voice thinned to a whisper at the thought of him lurking in the hallway. He might still be out there. She grabbed the bat and ran lightly across the room, flicked on the overhead light and turned. Stay there, she ordered. Do not move. I hesitated, caught between fight and flight, 1 foot on the floor. She didn't wait for an answer and flung open the door, bat poised to strike, before disappearing into the hallway. The slam of the laundry door propelled me off the bed, but by the time I made it to the downstairs hall, she was already halfway up the stairs. I clung to the rail, heart hammering, unsure whether to follow her. Lights flicked on upstairs, letting me track her movements as she worked her way from room to room. Just as the need to know forced my bare feet onto the steps, she reappeared, rattled the front door, and finally, satisfied, headed back down towards me. I retreated to my bed, hugging a pillow to my chest. He's gone. She parked herself on the bed beside me. I think you scared 10 years' growth out of him with that god-awful scream. She studied me in the silence that followed. The laundry door was open. What? Maybe it was delayed shock, but I couldn't seem to process what she was getting at. Kat, she said slowly, the outside door from the laundry, do you remember if it was shut when you went to bed? Thoughts skittered round like marbles inside my head. I think so. Dad always locked up before he went to work. No, wait. I'd hung out a load of washing. Maybe I'd left it open. I don't know. Kat. She reached out like she was going to touch me, like the last 3 years had never happened. I reared back and she flinched. It had been a long time since I'd allowed myself to look at her. I suspected that she and Dad still talked, but he never admitted to it. He'd once told me that loving the same person gives you a lot in common, a lot to talk about. Hating the same person does too, but he doesn't hate her, so we have nothing to say on that score. Way back when, she'd been the same age as my mum, 37. Now she'd have to be 40, getting old, while Mum wasn't. I turned away, catching our reflection in the mirrored door of my wardrobe. My mother's betrayer and me, together in our shorty pyjamas. This was wrong. She had no right to be here.
Wonderful, Chris. And another really, really great book. Now, you need to write some more for me, okay?
Working on it, Jenny.
Good. Okay, our next reader is Allison Rushby. Come on in, Allison.
Hi, everybody. I'm on the land of the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and today I'm going to be reading from When This Bell Rings, which is my new book. I'm not reading from the start, but from page 65, where our heroine Tamsin has just entered her favourite fictional world, the London of the Bells. Okay. I'm flying. I'm actually flying. The sky is clear, the breeze is in my face. My body trembles with a strange mix of wonder and terror as the wind rushes past. I look down in awe at laneways and buildings, trees and apartments, mosques and hospitals, and the long grey ribbon of the Thames to our right. Once we'd climbed to the top of the station escalators, Kit, Wilf and Bess regrouped. Kit ran on ahead and checked outside. He said there were several groups on the street, but no one immediately outside the entrance to the station. He couldn't see any ravens. Wilf and Bess guessed there might be some around, but that most of them would be in Stepney, dealing with the destruction chime at St. Dunstan's. That's where the danger would be. Do we need to go through the plan? Kit said. I think we've got it down by now, Bess replied. Get as close as we can to the bell, immobilise it, don't get killed. The not getting killed part is always my favourite bit, Wilf said. Don't forget we'll be near the tower, Kit reminded everyone. We'll need to be extra careful. The tower. There had always been ravens at the Tower of London because of a long-held superstition. If its 6 captive ravens left the tower, it was believed that the crown would fall and Britain with it. No one had ever dreamed it would be the ravens who remained and the crown who fled. The king and his family had escaped at the last possible moment, just before the bells had first struck their magical chimes and that invisible barrier had been drawn around the outskirts of London. While Britain hadn't fallen, it had lost its capital. That was over 10 years ago now. 10 years of London suffering under the rule of the ravens and their magical bells. And what am I supposed to do with this? Bess jerked a thumb at me. Stick her somewhere safe, I guess, Wilf said. Reckon she can get hurt? I cut myself before. I held out my grazed elbow. Here, in this world. There's our answer, Kit said. I watched as Kit unwound a thin strip of tan leather from his wrists. I'd seen him do this so many times in the graphic novels and in the movies. I held my breath, waiting to see it happen for real. A rustling noise and a puff of air made me look back over at Bess, except she was no longer there. Wilf looked up and around the inside of the disused station, his eyes coming to rest on a metal beam. Spotted. Before I could find her, Bess swooped past my head and came to perch upon Wilf's shoulder. In San Martin form, Bess was smaller than my hand. She was delicate and fragile with a creamy beige breast, the most perfectly pointed angular wings and a tiny triangle of a beak. As she stared in my direction, I realised I'd never had a bird look at me with such loathing before. I still couldn't understand why she hated me, and it wasn't anything I'd said, because it had been from the first moment she'd had taken a proper look at me. Bess hovered over each of us in turn, flapping her wings and releasing the dust that would help us fly. And then I saw what I'd been waiting for. Kit tied the tiny strip of leather to one of her feet. "Whatever you do, don't let go," he told me, passing the leather strip over. "She was probably serious about not turning back for you if you fall."
Thank you, Alison. That was wonderful. I am a flyer in my dreams. When I read that scene, I could imagine flying. I think I must have been a bird in another life. Okay, our final reader for today is Will Kostakis.
Hi there, I'm Will Kostakis, and today I will be reading from my fantasy novel Monuments, which is about 3 teens who skip school to find the ancient gods who are buried under different Australian high schools. And this scene takes place after my protagonist Connor meets one of the gods for the first time and is sort of coming to terms with it. Derek's steps are uneven, like he's nursing an injury. He drags his right foot a little, but I only notice because I'm staring, and he notices my staring. "Live as long as I have, and you will collect your fair share of ailments too," he says. I apologize. He shrugs it off. Even with his ailments, I still have to alternate between walking and jogging to keep up with him. General politeness dictates I should probably make small talk, but is it rude to waste a god's time like that? My experience with gods is limited to Greek Orthodox church services my grandparents dragged me to as a kid, the names Mum takes in vain, and the photos our school rowing champion Brent Armadi uploads online with the hashtag God. "Did you create the world?" I ask. "With the other monuments, yes. It was a collaboration. If the world were a mound of clay, Nuo bound it together, I gave it shape, Aidan and Finn tempered it with fire and ice, and Javanta gave it life. Before they contained the feuding sisters in another realm and allowed humankind to flourish, the monument's big achievement was creating the world. No biggie. They started with their metaphorical mound of clay and..." I pause thinking. "But who made the clay?" I ask. Derek laughs. "And who made me?" That's more uncertainty than I expect in a deity. Gods don't have gods, do they? "Gods have gods," he says. "And they have gods?" "Presumably, yes." I'm distracted by the mental image of a nested doll of gods within gods for a moment. "Do you pray to them?" He smiles wryly. "Do you pray to me?" That's a ridiculous question. I didn't even know he existed until this morning. I say so. "Most gods worth their salt don't trouble themselves with being known or worshipped," he says. "Creating something, seeing that creation flourish, that is what satiates us, not the size of our followings." I don't know what makes me think of my grandfather, but I do. It must be Derek's vibe. He has the air about him of someone who's been around a long time. His words have weight. I could never understand the things my grandfather would tell me, but judging by the way my distant cousins flocked to him for advice, his words had weight too. Once, anyway. I exhale and try to think of something different. "What are the other monuments like?" I ask. He sighs and his lips curl as he reminisces. "Javanta is wise, far wiser than me. She is the mother of all that live and breathe in this world, the creator of life. Nuo has a sharp wit and no patience for fools. She is loyal, reliable, but prone to cheating when one turns their back on her during a contest. Aidan is fiery and sometimes reckless. He is driven by his passions, whereas Finn is calmer and more measured," Derek says. "We are an unconventional family, and as dangerous as movements are, it will be wonderful to see them again." I'm still coming to terms with meeting one God. The idea of meeting more, I don't have words. I must admit, a guardian enlisting an accomplice is unorthodox, he says, eyeing me strangely. I specialise in falling from heights without spraining ankles, apparently, I say, far too arrogantly. Let's hope your luck lasts, he says. You're muted.
Yep, right. Thanks. Thanks, Will. Thanks. That was wonderful. And I did so enjoy reading that book. I need to get on to book 2 to find out what happens next. And don't forget those people who are still here from the year 10. Will be on next Tuesday morning, and he'll be expanding a bit more on monuments and Rebel Gods, the sequel. Yes. And it's great having you, Will, as an ambassador here and Sally as a past ambassador. And I hope that all the students have got great ideas for books for the reading hour next Thursday, so just a week away. And looking at the chat room, you know, there's a few people reporting back saying the books are flying off the shelves here too. And all the kids that have been sitting in listening are all rushing over to borrow all your books, which is exactly what we wanted. So I don't seem to have any questions coming into the chat room, but I guess it's pretty close to the end of school time. So they're all saying thank you for another great author session from Year 6 of Amberley State School. Fantastic stories, and all the children seem to have enjoyed it. So thank you so much, everyone, for giving us your time and being here today.